And coming up next, this is one of our oldest performers, oldest in terms of having been with us the longest, not in terms of age, although that may become relevant in the next few seconds as I introduce the performer who he's a local spec fic writer performer. I've got several of his books on my shelf as I've just been doing I'm in the middle of moving and I've been doing another deep dive into my library. I think I just smashed 3 of your books together and who has also elected to spend his birthday doing this with us, staring into his webcam and telling us a story, which is a thing of beauty. I think it's great. Please welcome to our stage, Pat Harrigan.
Thanks, Philip. Quite some time ago, maybe 15 years, in the midst of an otherwise unexceptional conversation, my late friend, the Lady Louise Forbes Hamilton, said to me, "You know, water and air are much the same thing, really. The one is oxygen in a menage a trois, and the other is oxygen hosting an orgy." Now, Lady Forbes Hamilton was not a scientist by training, and her observation drew more upon her experience in London's West End society than molecular chemistry. That said, she recognized an indulgent smile when she saw one, as she saw mine on this occasion, and she was always prepared to go that extra mile to wipe it off. "Darling boy," she said, distilling every bit of our 2-decade age gap into the words, "I know more about all those little terms than you'll ever know, and that includes the words air and water." Whereupon she related to me a very strange story indeed. In the summer of 1969, Lady Forbes Hamilton, let me call her Louise, it was an intimacy we shared, among others, Louise attended the opening night performance of Peter Brook's new production of Marat Sade, starring Albert Finney, Terence Stamp, and Rita Tushingham. The play did not meet with her approval, but she consented to join the cast and crew at their after party at a local pub, and later at an enormous 4-terraced stucco home in Belgravia. She never found out who owned the place. "Very old money," she told me, by which I mean money about 3 times as old as your country. Anyway, she was drunk, of course. And also someone must have slipped something into her drink, she said, which was her personal code for having taken some drug she preferred not to admit to. So, absenting herself from the flirting and the chat, she stepped onto one of the back balconies for some air. Behind the house, 4 stories below her, enclosed by high walls bordered by hedges, was a courtyard dominated by a wide, shallow pool of Cornish granite, with a bronze bathing Venus in the center. It brought her into a melancholy frame of mind. Only a week before this, Brian Jones, founding member of the Rolling Stones and a friend of sorts, had been found dead in his swimming pool. The splashing from the fountain was detectable only in the very center of the pool. From where Louise stood, most of the courtyard seemed mirror smooth, reflecting the facade of the house, bright white in the windless evening, some windows dark, some pale, with a small duplicate of her on the uppermost, which is to say furthermost, floor. But not mirror smooth, not exactly, because in it she could see the ripple marks of some small colorless fish here and there and here, otherwise undetectable, observable only by their wake. Then as she watched, the image of the facade began to break up prismatically, its white gleam drawing apart into its constituent colors, bright primary reds and blues and golds, spreading across the surface of the water and upward into the 3rd dimension of the courtyard. Then in the smoke from her cigarette, she seemed to see the same sort of fish-like rippling, and a moment later the air around her was full of it, as if some invisible school had swum through the world. Her perspective slipped, and the world was now riot with color. On the balcony, she still stood, left hand pressed lightly to the exterior wall, but her body was somehow different, more lightly felt. Her hair floated. When she breathed, it was to inhale a surrounding substance like warm gelatin that soothed her lungs like aloe and invigorated like cocaine. Her cigarette unraveled into pieces and drifted away. She marveled at the rainbow around her. Without a doubt, she was now resident in the underwater reflection home. She turned and went inside with lightly bouncing steps. From far away, she saw people she knew at the far end of corridors and disappearing through doorways. Some seemed as if they would like to stay and greet her, but instead they nodded their regrets and left for pressing obligations. Others seemed to avoid her gaze entirely and dart away. Had she offended them? Made some grievous social faux pas? She hurried to catch up, but failed to find them in the corridors of colors. More recently, not really very long ago, when I visited Louise in the hospital, she reminded me again of this part of the story. At that point, the pneumonia was taking hold, but she had not yet been ventilated, so she was able to talk to me for half an hour, though it was hard on her. I suppose it was a premonition, she said. When you grow older, your friends and lovers leave you, and it does make one sink a little, as it were. Mark that, dear, and turn your face for a moment while I adjust this fucking thing in my nose. But that was later. In the story she had told me, at this point, a tall, handsome man approaches her. I should mention that in Lady Forbes Hamilton's stories, the men who approached her were invariably tall and handsome, and usually Mediterranean. But this was different in a special way, she insisted. Was it Terence Stamp? I asked, since I have a long-standing boy crush on Terence Stamp. No, dear, it was not Terence. This one was more sinister and genteel, like Vincent Price. Now shush. She looked into his mesmerizing eyes. He laid a hand on her shoulder and pulled her closer, bringing his mouth to her ear as if to whisper her a secret. All around her, the world dazzled. Her heart pounded. He said to her, "Can I feel your tit?" "Oh, come on, Louise," I said. "I mean, really." "It's how it is, my dear. Uplands, lowlands, or supernatural places. Just randy men dotting the landscape like dandelions or beds of kelp. Don't tell me you're above it, my angel. I see you." I was insulted. Did this story even happen? "Oh, yes, of course it did," she said. "I've never lied to you." So I let him have a little grope, and then he walked me through the place. And it was really remarkable. I saw people I knew, or versions of them. I saw Catherine Deneuve swimming with a school of dolphins and Mick Jagger dancing with clams. I heard Jane Birkin and Serge Gainsbourg composing something unspeakable, and I saw Enoch Powell naked in a cloud of whale blood. Somewhere in the background, there was a war. It was also very full of meaning. My dear, you're simply too young. You can't understand. You had to be there. I didn't understand. Until the day she died, Louise insisted that this was no sort of parable, but the literal truth. Louise was level-headed about most things, but not about this. It had happened just as she said, she said. The next morning, she had woken up in Albert Finney's bedroom, fully clothed, she assured me, and she rang her sister to pick her up. But yes, my dear, there is an underwater world, spooky and supernatural, more colorful than our own, though, she admitted, the same in some respects. As above, sort of as below. Everything top to bottom, linked by a chain of many colors, she said. Fixed somewhere up in the invisible, airless firmament, she supposed, trailing down through our breathy and earthly lives, anchoring in the deep waters of our souls. And what that universal chain is... She began gasping for breath, worn out, and couldn't complete her thought. I lifted her shoulders and held the plastic expectoration thing to her mouth and ungnarled her hair on the pillows. Her breath bubbled and stabilized, and I kissed her sweaty forehead. She lifted her hand to cup my neck, so I kissed her again on her cheek. You men, she whispered, leaning back. Oh my goodness, you men. Thank you. I think that's all I have to say for tonight. I apologize for being abrupt, but I thank you for your attention, and I hope you are all keeping your heads, as the saying goes, above water. Goodbye.
Woo!
All right, let's keep it going for Pat Harrigan. All right, Pat, do you have anything to plug coming up? Any place you want people to find you online that you'd like us to know about?
Well, I do have a book, Philip, of much of my spoken word stuff from the last couple of years. As you know, it is called The Lecture Tour.
Awesome.
I often sell this in person at various shows, which is not going to happen anytime soon. So it's available on Amazon. I know Amazon is evil, but that's where it is. So please, drop a couple bucks on The Lecture Tour. And I hope to have a sequel coming sometime next year or in 2022. Which will include the story that I just read.
Fantastic. All right, folks, that's Pat Harrigan.